Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation, Reference Data Management in TopBraid Enterprise Data Governance. I would like to start by introducing you to today's speakers. We have Irene Polikoff. Irene is the CEO and co-founder at TopQuadrant. We also have Jack Spivak, and Jack is a semantic solution architect, also with TopQuadrant. In today's webinar, Jack will introduce the value of reference data management and steps needed for implementing it. He will present a high-level overview of how TopBraid EDG addresses key requirements to support a modern reference data management solution and enables a comprehensive but incremental approach. Irene will demonstrate capabilities that TopBraid EDG provides for getting started with RDM, for importing, mapping, and curating reference data within a collaborative multi-user environment, and for connecting RDM with broader data governance assets and capabilities. So just a few logistical items before we get started today. Please feel free to ask questions as we go along by using your GoToWebinar controls. To post questions, just look on the right-hand side control panel. You should see a drop-down box for questions, and if you click on that box, you should be able to post your question at any time during the presentation. We will address as many questions as time allows at the conclusion of the webinar. We will also be asking a couple of polling questions after Irene's demo, and we will also be recording the webinar, and we'll send a link to the recorded version. With that, I will hand it over to Jack to start today's webinar. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Christy. So I guess we can just dive right into today's program on reference data management using TopBraid Edge. A couple words about ourselves. We're TopQuadrant, and as a company, we believe that capturing the meaning of information, including many different aspects of it, is essential for data governance. We also believe strongly that this has to be done using standards. Governance must be scalable and interconnected if it's going to be effective, and proprietary vendor-specific approaches to representing semantics will not accomplish this goal. Instead, it actually creates additional silos. Our passion, and I hope you'll share that with me in this presentation, is for delivering standards-based tools for comprehensive data governance that creates connections across silos. You can see a few of our customers here. We work with a variety of enterprise clients across different industries, and not represented yet on this slide actually are a number of customers we have in the financial services sector, and that's been a significant focus area for us lately because of its complexity and the compliance requirements. So to get oriented before jumping into the actual product demo, I want to talk briefly about reference data. What is it? Why might you need to manage it, and how's the best way to get started? And finally, Irene will be taking over to demonstrate how Edge with the RDM package helps with this. So what is reference data? Reference data is critical data with critical impact, and it's found associated with various kinds of data throughout the enterprise. For example, could be business intelligence, operations, be product and customer data. Mission-critical applications use reference data specifically to classify and categorize other data. As a result, reference data has a major impact on everything from the integrity of business intelligence reports to the success or failure of system integration efforts. And its impact is even greater because it's so pervasive. I'm not going to go through this entire slide. We'll be sending these along after the webinar. But just to give you a flavor for it, it's been estimated that 20 to 50% of the tables in a database can actually be reference data. So because of this, reference data needs to be centralized and managed well. And if it is, there's many benefits and bottom line values to be gained. And if it's not, there's substantial costs. As you can see here, reference data fits into a larger scheme of data governance, and it's actually a really good place to start a master data management initiative because of its relative ease and high value. You may have both internal and external reference data, and managing reference data well because of this requires an enterprise environment, and specifically one that enables connection, sharing, and distribution of reference data meaningfully with other people with other data, with other systems, and with other functions and initiatives. And TopQuadrant's RDM solution provides these capabilities precisely by situating reference data management within a governance framework. So when we talk about connecting with other people and systems and data, what does that actually mean? For example, one of the things that we have strong support for is the capture of and access to comprehensive metadata about the data. And this is incredibly important because without comprehensive metadata, stakeholders will not have shared understanding of the meaning of the reference data. And you can see here on this slide, there's important questions that need to be answered. What's this data set about? Who uses it? What are its limitations? And on and on. So if we don't manage in this way to actually capture these kinds of metadata about the data, confusion, wasted resources, and errors are going to result. And you can see in this example, metadata describing which codes are needed is missing. And it causes confusion. The people in the illustration don't know which code set to use. And this is just one example. Other kinds of problems that result include errors from lack of governance when updating code lists and the actual coding errors in using these codes within applications. There can be miscommunication across enterprise systems. And in fact, decentralized ad hoc reference data management is simply costly and error-prone. A shared understanding of the meaning of reference data is essential to its effective use and governance. And reference data is critical because it impacts the entire enterprise data landscape. Without governance systems and the ability to create and maintain vital connections, all the different pieces of information you see here become fragmented. TopBraid EDG, our governance platform, uses semantic technologies to connect the dots between the business, operational, and technical metadata to create an integrated data landscape, which helps turn shared understandings into actionable understandings. TopBraid EDG offers pre-built models and features that you see here to support governance over a complete range of information assets. With EDG, you can start, for instance, with reference data, but then extend later to govern other assets like business glossaries and big data if and when you're ready to do so. We like to say that EDG captures the complexity of your enterprise as a topology or a map to help answer questions like, where does this data originate? And where do I find information relevant to this analysis? How do we provide this capability in EDG? Well, EDG maps your organization's assets to a rich, standardized data model that can be extended or customized as needed. It supports an incremental approach to governance because we offer a comprehensive suite of modular packages, and this modularity allows you to custom tailor the solution to best fit your use cases. Packages that you see here are positioned to support selected assets with appropriate connections for relevant data and data sources. Each of these packages is available as an initial configuration of EDG, and packages can be added in any combination toward your targeted scope of data governance. Today, we're going to be talking specifically about reference data management, and let's take a look at what's coming up in the demo. We'll be talking about how to get started. Irene will show you what's involved in identifying and then using EDG to catalog where your reference data is located. We'll look at the benefits of a multi-user solution because it enables collaboration. And this is really important. Irene will just touch on that, and I'll come back with a few comments after. There's a great benefit to being able to use standardized data sets. Irene will show you how to do that, and even more, how you might connect your reference data management initiative with broader data governance initiatives and goals. So what does this look like? First step is to actually look out at the organization and identify existing enterprise databases and systems, and then we'll be using EDG to create a catalog of those. What's that look like? Well, it looks like importing metadata about these enterprise databases into an EDG data asset. Why do we want to do that? Because it allows us to interactively explore an integrated view of enterprise data structure This is good because it allows us to actually identify the kinds of things that might be reference data and where it's used. Having done that, we can import the discovered reference data into Edge reference data sets, and this allows us to actually manage and control and govern and centralize the distribution of this information. Finally, once you've got that reference data, you can actually connect it to other standardized reference data sets if that's advantageous. And it might be because it helps to analyze, compare, and understand your organization's performance, especially in the context of the larger marketplace and economics and all of the things that you might want to look at in business. So about to turn it over to Irene, and what you're going to see her do is exactly that. And we're going to do it with some harvested data from a fictitious corporate HR department. And the example we'll be using is about job categories. You can see what that might look like here in a reference data table. And then we're going to use Edge to explore the relevant data assets, create some reference data, and then connect it out with a standardized reference data set, which is the standard occupational codes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Irene.
Thank you, Jack. Let me start sharing my screen. And what you should see now is TopBraid Edge. It's a home screen or starting panel. As Jack has mentioned, this is an environment where you could manage all sorts of assets, from your technical metadata to your business glossaries, business metadata, and of course reference data sets. It's packaged modularly into different packages. Right now I am running the entire environment, so on the left you'll see quite a number of different things that are governed in this environment. Today we will focus on reference data sets, and I already have a few reference data sets preloaded for the demo, including job categories and the industry standard occupational classification that we will talk about. But so once they load it in the environment, organization could start governing them, which means assigning responsibilities to them, managing their change, their statuses, distributing them to consuming systems, and so on. But the question that we often get from customers is, all right, that's great, but how do I get started? As Jack was mentioning, what would be the first steps? Every organization already has a lot of reference data that is in use, and it's located in the numerous databases that they're using. So one of the first steps is often about surveying and cataloging their data landscape. And the asset that will help us with that is data assets, which is where we capture technical metadata about databases, columns, and so on. So this is where I'm going to get started. And again, I already have a couple of data assets pre-populated. One deals with human resources data domain, another one deals with product sales data. But just for this demo, let me create a new one and talk about what it means to create a new data asset model and how do you actually bring the information in. So it's fairly simple. I'm going to create one for the webinar and say webinar data asset. And typically when you deal with the technical metadata, you want to include some you want to manage and include some data types, be it Oracle data types or SQL Server data types or some application-specific data types. And that's what I'm doing here. So once I've created the data asset, my next step would be actually to harvest the technical metadata. And I could do it in a number of ways. So one of them, if I have a direct connection to my databases, I could simply use JDBC connection to bring this information in. I could also use a variety of file importers, for example, use a DDL definitions and bring that in. If I have a data dictionary, this typically is tabular, like a spreadsheet. I have a number of spreadsheet importers. We're going to use one of them today, later on. And of course, this is standards-based system, so another type of import I could use is RDF, which is a W3C Worldwide Web Consortium standard for describing data and metadata. So that gives you a little bit of an introduction of how you actually bring this information in. But let me switch to the data asset that I've already brought in, which is my human resources data. And there, let us see what kind of information we typically have in the data asset. Well, it's about data sets, it's about databases, so obviously we'll have database tables here, columns, and so on. It's a small schema, small set of information, and there are just a few tables. And in a situation like this, the business analyst or data analyst, data steward could quickly eye it and say, well, it looks like, for example, regions is reference data, and we could capture that information right here. There is quite a bit of information that I could capture about my data assets. So, for example, I could say what the data type is, or table type is. So, a master data, transactional data, in this case, reference data. By this, I'm beginning a process of cataloging information. If I have something much larger, search becomes important. For example, often reference data has table names that involve the word category in it, so we could do a search like that and just isolate tables that look like they are categories. And in this case, this is the reference table that we're going to be working with, which is the job categories table. And it has just a few columns, job category ID and job category description. Now that I have identified it as a reference table, my next step would be to actually bring this data in and start connecting it to other information that I'm managing in TopBraid Edge. The process for doing that, let us go to the reference data sets. And again, I've already brought this information in. I have this HR job categories reference data set that I could now give status to, assign ownership, responsibility, further describe it in terms of its purpose, in terms of its usage, etc. But just to show how I actually bring the data in, let me create a new reference data set, and again we could call it webinar job categories. And that. And I've created a reference data set. And now I'm going to import data into it. I've already have a spreadsheet with my sample reference data. So let us take a look at it. It's just a simple Excel spreadsheet that looks like your typical reference data table. and let us import it. I'm going to choose the file and the Excel spreadsheet. And we support various patterns. You see the preview of the spreadsheet. We support various patterns of importing because sometimes in the spreadsheets you have hierarchies, you have relationships, and so on. This is a simple table, so I'm going to use this no hierarchy pattern, and I'm just going to simply import this data and click on finish. Okay. So let's take a look at it. Yeah, that's the entity of which we have a reference data for. I could clean up some columns here. Oh, there's a comprehensive search, and the search actually drives what shows in the grid. So just to make it a little bit less busy, I could do something like this, and the number of columns changes, and you could see the information that I brought in, which is essentially the name of the job category and the category code. Once the information is in, again, I could add more information to it, assigning responsibilities, also capturing more descriptive information beyond just the label, capturing additional facts and possibly additional relationship with other data. So let me switch back to the reference data set that we already have for this demo. One of the connections that I want to make is connected to some other reference data sets, because what happens with data is that reference data describes it, and since we have different applications and different databases, we use different reference data. Now, what you could do in this environment, you could start mapping across different reference data sets, and that will be necessary in order to interpret and aggregate your operational data. Anything could be mapped and connected with anything. What we find most useful is for each area of interest, identify quote-unquote enterprise reference data set. Often industry standards is being used. In our case, we have this standard occupational classification codes. And with that, we could talk more about what type of a data set it is, where it's coming from, subscription information, and all other information that could come with a reference data set like that. We could also take a look at it. It's a more comprehensive data set than our simple example with the job code categories, because it comes from the industry. It has a variety and abundance of codes. It may be useful to look at it in a more hierarchical nature, because it's organized in categories and subcategories and so on. So that's our enterprise or standard reference data set. And what we're going to do now is connect the data set we're using for HR job categories to this standard. The way we do this in TopBraid Edge is through crosswalks. And let us take a look at the example crosswalk that maps our HR job categories to the SOC standard from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And you could see that I've already created a few mappings here. The mappings could be many to many, because I could map more than one category So this maps electrical engineers in my HR reference data set to 2 categories in the SAC data set. I could also look at it from the other direction, and look what SAC is mapped to in my HR job categories. Once those kind of mappings are established, they're very useful for people to know how data, let's say, in one data source is connected to data in another data source. And they're also very useful for systems, because when systems translate or aggregate data, they could consult TopBraid Edge through live APIs and see how the information translates and how it maps. For example, let me show you an API call. So we already have a simple API call prepared. Is just a simple REST service that will look at the mapping for this job category IT65, which we are seeing right here, which is IT support. And what this web service call will do, it will look through all possible mappings. In our situation, we only have one where we cross-reference SAC with our job categories, but in our environment there could have been any number of mappings, and it will deliver the mapping information to the calling system through the web service. So let me click on that and open this. In this case, I've received the information as XML. It could have been JSON or some other serialization that is important to my system. So we could see that that code actually maps to SAC category 151142, which is Network and Computer System Administrators. So this is the example of the immediate value. Once you have a crosswalk, you could use it to automate your data aggregation and translation. This is important for systems. It's also very important for people, because when, as Jack was showing this example where some people are looking at reports and they're seeing some pretty, obscure codes like IT65, and they want to know what it is, what it means. They need to have a central place to look up this information and find out its meaning. And TopBraid Edge provides this capability as well. So you could, for example, go here and look up all the codes managed by the system, and you discover that actually that's a code for IT support in this HR job categories dataset, but it also happens to be a code for a country subdivision. So depending on the context, you could find out more information. So that's one example of the connection that we have built. What other connections can we build? We could now go to go again to our data assets and go to this human resource data and explicitly say that the job category column in a database, let me find that table again. Okay. Yeah. So we have job category column that was in that reference table. We could start capturing the allowed value, expected permissible values in that column. Now that we have the reference data set and it's available to us, we could go and say that actually the range of values comes from this reference data set. And we could save this information. And now it's available for us. So anytime we look at our catalog of data assets, we could also see what is the reference data. It's now managed outside of our database. It has additional metadata. It could go through the change control and evolution process. I think Jack will talk a little bit about it. It could have collaboration around it in terms of assignments of tasks, assignments of comments, and it could be connected to my technical metadata about the databases. Another type of connection is how this data lives in a broader architectural landscape of enterprise applications. So I could always see where this data element is being used. And I see that it's being used in my human capital management application. It's a business application, and it's being used as an input to it. So I built yet another connection from first from my data asset to my reference data, and now from my data asset to my technical asset, which is my application. Let's take a look at that area of edge. Again, I've already have an example here for us, which is technical assets for this fictitious division 1. It's a set of different applications that are used by division 1, and there is all sorts of information that I could capture about an application. It ranges from its configuration metadata to its business metadata as to what it's used for, what it supports, where it runs on, and so on. It also has information about its inputs and outputs. In this case, I've connected it to this job category IDs from this HR data asset. And of course, I could add any number of other information. By the way, everything you see here in TopBraid Edge is highly configurable. We ship with models that describe the type of metadata you want to capture about your assets. But you could add your own metadata, you could add your own connections between those assets. Everything is open to configuration, and the configurations are designed to survive any updates as you go through the releases of the software. So I'm not gonna do much editing, but I want to show you a little bit about the visualization capabilities, because some people like to explore textually by clicking on links. Other people like to see visualizations. And here, if we focus on the system, human capital management, we could see what its inputs are. In the real life scenario, of course, it will have multiple inputs. And we see that this input comes from the reference data set of HR job categories, and we could continue exploring it like that. Again, in the real life scenario, of course, you'll have many more inputs and outputs, and you could also would be able to focus on this data set and see where else it may be used, what other applications or what other data sources may be using that. All right, so with that, I think one other area that I want to point out or do a quick demo of is actually focusing on collaboration. As we started with the home screen of TopBraid Edge, you may have noticed that I have a few tasks here that have been created. And they have been one of them have been created for the technical asset, another one has been created for reference data set. This capability to create both tasks and comments exists at every level in TopBraid Edge. So I could go to my reference data sets, for example, the job categories, and I could see tasks that are associated with it. Tasks can be for a specific code, such as software engineering. They could be for a data set as a whole. They could be assigned to various people. They could have statuses. There is integration with Jira for those who are interested in more comprehensive management of activities. And then a simpler feature is a commenting feature. Again, the comments could, I don't have any comments at this point, but comments could be happening at the data set level and also at the level of the individual code. And even people who don't have edit capabilities for this reference data set could still comment and receive notifications about changes and therefore participate in the collaboration. With that, I'd like to transfer back to Jack. Jack will show some of the more comprehensive lineage type of visualizations that I didn't cover in this demo, and also go in more detail over the change management capabilities and collaboration features in TopBraid Edge and reference data management.
Thank you, Irene. That was quite a comprehensive demo, even a little more than I had anticipated. So that's great. And coming back out of the demo, we just wanted to say a few more words and hit some of the highlights that Irene hasn't had the opportunity to do there. You can see here that we have a great deal more that's in the software, a lot around change management and versioning. We've got collaboration capabilities, there's security and permissions control. So I'm just going to hit a couple of these. And the first one is just that we are a multi-language platform and support different character sets and languages and dictionaries if that should be desirable. And because it's a multi-user platform, of course, we have role-based access controls, and these access controls can assign user roles at a very granular level. So different assets could have different people in different roles managing them. So manager and editor roles are typically for data stewards and curators, but we also have system-wide read-only roles that would support people being able to search all these data sets and to be able to make those comments that you saw Irene mentioning. Quite a really rich system for workflow and change management. Won't get deeply into it, but just to name that we have production vocabularies, which are what you would expect. They're the ones that are in use. And you don't want to be modifying those typically until they've gone through some sort of an approval process. So we offer a working copy, and this is a live virtual copy of the production vocabulary, and it's created for editing purposes. So you could have a working copy and it would go through approval processes. You can have several working copies live at the same time, and they could be frozen for review. This allows full auditability. There's reporting that can be done on these working copies, and individuals or teams can be enabled to see and edit them just like for the production copies. More collaboration. Irene mentioned comments. This just shows what it might look like if someone, you can see down below, there's a send comment button. And this allows user or a team member to send a comment to the editors. Here you see them commenting on something that could be cleaned up on the term Algeria. When the editor comes up and looks at their system, just as Irene showed you when a task was available, the editor would see all of the comments that are available along with the status. So in this case, you can see here in the lower right-hand corner that there's one that could be resolved, could also be declined, stay open. So there's statuses on these as well. Beyond that, we offer quite a bit in the way of reporting and visual dashboards to actually track various data consistency metrics. Again, without going into all the complexity, we look at completeness and validity. There could be issues with, say, incomplete reference data or data that violated specific rules. This is going to be an example of that in our data quality validation, where these rules are executed whenever data is created or modified. So you can have entered it, rules could change, RDM will alert you if any of the data violates the rules. So new business rules might be introduced at any time, and the constraint violation report feature is going to uncover any old data that violates the newly added or modified rule. Irene showed you something called a neighborgram. This is, and I like to think of it as an extended version of that. This is our lineagegram, and if you were to look at this just from left to right, you can see that tables in a database might be the source of information in blue used by a collection of applications in green. And you can see it can get quite complex. Some applications may use data generated or transformed by other applications, and then the output of those various applications will feed the creation of different forms or reports or other information artifacts that are used at the enterprise level. This lineagegram allows you to sort through these and select chains of connectedness and report out on them or discover more about them. Finally, this is the last really complex slide I'm going to show, but there's too much here to talk about. But basically, this is intended to give you a flavor of what's involved in integrating TopBraid Edge with other systems. It's designed for the purpose, and you see in the center in red there that everything in Edge is contained in a central repository, and that repository is available to third-party systems. You see there on the right, down near the bottom, or through the user interface that Irene was demonstrating to a user. So we can interact with people and or systems this way. Edge is capable of importing in a variety of different formats and can export in those. So you could, the data itself is all portable, but because it's based on a server platform, we can also do this live and interact directly from third-party systems through API services, through messaging frameworks, and through direct SPARQL query. If any of you are familiar with semantic standards, it's much like SQL, but you can query all this directly. So to close, for success, a comprehensive reference data management solution must be an enabler of both reference data governance and reference data management. This requires much more than a tool, no matter how good or flexible or extensible it is. Organizational structures and integrated process collaboration and change management are needed. Finally, models, methodologies, tools, and dedicated resources with the right technology is going to put the right capabilities in the hands of those who govern and use reference data. And with that, we're going to turn to a poll, and I guess going to hand this over to Christy to say a little more about that.
Thank you, Jack. As mentioned earlier, we would appreciate your feedback on 3 quick polling questions. We'll then come back to the Q&A portion of the webinar, and we will be sharing the results of each polling question so that you're able to see how your peers responded. So Jack, if you'll go ahead and throw the first one up.
Okay.
So the first question is, what does your organization use today to manage reference data? If you could select one of the following: spreadsheets, another MDM vendor platform, ERP system, purpose-built RDM solution, or other tools that aren't listed. We'll just give a couple of seconds for folks to answer that question, and then we'll share the results. Okay, looks like the... Okay, go ahead, Jack, and let's share that. Okay, oh wow, okay, it looks like half of you are using spreadsheets, and a good portion of you are using other tools that aren't listed, which is interesting. Thank you. Let's go to the second polling question. We'll publish that. Okay. Is it important to stay within the same software solution or have separate solutions for multiple areas of data governance? And if you'll select one of the following: you prefer to stay with the same solution, you're okay having separate solutions, or it's just not important to you. Give a couple of seconds for answers to come in. Okay, Jack, I think we're good. Go ahead and publish those results.
Okay.
Okay. All right. That's a pretty good Varied answer. Some are okay, 43%, 36% prefer to stay with the same solution. Thank you. And we have one more for you. The final question, given that flexibility is important to data governance, if you don't mind rating the importance of having a solution that's proprietary versus a semantic standards-based representation of metadata. Very important, somewhat important, not important, or you're not sure what a semantic standards-based solution means. Okay, Jack, I think we're okay. Most of you find it important, and 27% aren't sure what a semantic standards-based solution means. So maybe we can address that a little bit in our Q&A, Irene, briefly. So I think that wraps up the poll. So we're going to get into the Q&A portion. We've had a few questions coming in. So let's go ahead and start with those questions. I'm just going to throw one at you, Irene. Let's see. Let's go ahead and start with, how do you handle the case when an old code becomes obsolete and is replaced by one or more new codes? Irene?
Yes, thank you, Christy. Yeah, the whole topic of evolution is actually a pretty rich topic, and may deserve a separate webinar of its own. But to answer it briefly, the best practice is, of course, to never delete a code as it stops being used, because organization will already have data that is described and coded using that code, and you will need to understand what the data means. You will need to bring it together possibly with the newer data, etc. So TopBraid EDG reference data management package will enforce such best practice. Once you describe your reference data set as being in active use, you will no longer be able to delete the code. Instead, what you could do is change the status of the code. This way, when you access data, retrieve data, you could always get only codes that are up to date, but you could also get all the codes that have ever been used by the system, and you could also get the dates of their effectivity and so on. This is done because it's, historical data, of course, will not be migrated to use the new set of codes. And in cases where you do want to migrate some of the historical data, so relationships and connections between the old codes and the new codes can be captured with TopBraid EDG, and then will help you facilitate that transition.
Thank you, Irene. We'll go to another question. What are the differences between and reasons for managing internal, external, and what are called standard reference data sets?
Well, most organizations will have both internal and external reference data. And by internal reference data, we mean typically something that's fairly unique to organizations, codes that deal with their unique product categories, for example, or location codes of their branches and offices that would be different from the location code of the country or a region. So they'd use internal reference data sets for those. And sometimes some legacy reference data sets that are kind of internal. The external data sets are typically used in a situation where a suitable, industry standard exists. So this could be like country and currency codes from ISO. We've seen occupational codes from Bureau of Labor of Statistics. There are industry codes from, different consortiums and governments, security identifiers from Bloomberg, and so on. So there is a few advantages of using this external reference data. You could rely on a third party to create and maintain it and keep it up to date. It will typically be more complete and future-proof because it takes into account, let's say, all the possible job categories and not just the job categories that you currently have in your organization. It makes it easier for you to integrate your data with data from your vendors. Sometimes you're required, your vendors, your partners, sometimes you're required to use them because, let's say, you do government reporting and you have to provide data categorized using some standard. So it's quite common, as we've shown today, for organizations to connect their external and internal reference data sets. And when they directly are able to use external reference data sets, sometimes they can extend them with the internal organization-specific codes. And some standards even have conventions for allocated groups of codes specifically designated for extensions.
Okay. Thank you, Irene. Maybe you could spend just a minute or two addressing the definition of what a semantic standards-based representation of metadata, what that means, since several folks on the webinar wasn't sure of the meaning.
Sure. At the foundation of TopBraid EDG and all TopQuadrant products are standards from the World Wide Web Consortium. It's the same organization that standardizes the use of, standardizes HTML and, other browser type of standards. And they also have standards for describing data and metadata. Quite often when organizations use products for metadata management, let's say, underneath this product are some models of how data and metadata should look like. And they are developed using proprietary representations, which basically creates yet another silo because no one knows what this representation means other than the vendor that provided it. And it also means that for extending it, you need to gain proprietary skills specific to this product. Everything in TopBraid EDG is based on the standards called linked data or semantic web standards. So we use standard, modeling, interoperable. So other vendors and companies that use the same standard could just read in our models, and they will interoperate. They also built around web standards, which means that they are referenceable on the web and directly connected, creating kind of a web of data and metadata, just like you have a map of HTTP and HTML links and connections. So that's a short description, and we could certainly provide more information in a follow-up.
Thank you, Irene. I think that pretty much takes us to the hour, so we can go ahead and wrap up today's webinar. And for those questions that we weren't able to answer today, we will be providing responses to you in a follow-up email, in which will also include a recording of today's webinar as well as the slides. Thank you all for attending. We hope you found today's information valuable. And thank you for your attention, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.